Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you
Hello, welcome to Self-Inflicted Oral Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast, every GBV LP, every 2 weeks. I'm Jeff Gomez, and in this episode, I'll be looking at 1994's B-1000. But first, let me say that all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Also, any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators, and of course, all opinions stated are my own. As usual, a special thanks goes out to Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database, which you can find at gbvdb.com. And for this episode, I also leaned heavily on Mark Woodworth's book about B-1000 from the 33 1/3 series, which, if you haven't read, I encourage you to go out and get. Visit everygbvlp.com to subscribe for future episodes or listen to past episodes. And if you'd like to drop me a line, you can do so by sending an email to jeff@everygbvlp.com. And real quick, I want to mention my new novel, Losing Our Edge. It shows you can go home again. You just might not like what you find when you get there. Visit losingouredge.com. And finally, I want to mention that next week I'm going to release a bonus podcast featuring a discussion with Scat Records founder Robert Griffin. We'll talk about all things B-1000 and a whole lot more, so check it out next week. And now let's get to the show. We're finally here, record number 7, B-1000, and shit yeah, it's cool. Because not only is this a truly great record, but 1994, the year B-1000 came out, ended up being sort of a annus mirabilis for Bob and the band. It would be their biggest year, a period where everything seemed to happen. But first, let's go back to 1993's Vampire and Titus, since that led directly to B-1000. Titus was the most raw-sounding record GBV had ever put out, and it was a success. Bob later said, "I'm very proud of the approach we took on Vampire on Titus. It was bizarre and noisy, and people wanted to hear it anyway, so that opened a door for us. It was liberating. Vampire on Titus could have destroyed us, but it didn't." But this left Bob with a big decision. I was wondering what to do next, what direction we should take it. Then it hit me. I should take all the best ideas that I hadn't used over the years, segments of songs, pieces of songs, and throw them together like a patchwork. It was basically an extension of what he'd done on Propeller, record a couple of new songs and mash them in with a bunch of older songs and reworked material. The result would be, as Pollard put it, like fitting a puzzle together to make a complete picture. The picture that Bob and the band would finally assemble would prove to be their masterpiece. As I mentioned, 1994 was the year where everything kind of went GBV's way. They released their best record, Bob was able to quit his job, and due to the success of their previous record, indie labels everywhere were asking him for material. In just this 1 year, the band released an LP, 4 EPs, 3 split singles, and they contributed to a soundtrack. It was a huge amount of material, rivaling even the gonzo rate at which Pollard releases stuff today. The big difference between then and now is that this was all on different labels. Everywhere he turned, someone asked Bob for a song or to put out an EP. And since he'd been so frustrated for so long, with his family not understanding his passion, not to mention recognizing his genius, Pollard said yes to everything. As drummer Don Thrasher later said, "It can't be easy on you when everyone thinks you're crazy and doesn't understand why you're taking out loans to make records nobody cares about. If anybody deserved that kind of recognition, it was Bob." And it must be said, pretty much all of this stuff put out that year was good. The EPs, Fast Japanese Spin Cycle, Clown Prince of the Menthol Trailer, and Get Out of My Stations all quickly became, and remain today, fan favorites. The band was entering its imperial phase, and they were everywhere. They could do no wrong. However, all that exposure and hype led to a backlash, which I'll talk about in the next episode. And even though it probably seemed like everything was going great inside the band, after all, they'd finally broken into the indie rock big time, all was not well. Around the time we were putting B-1000 together, Bob said, I was freaking out. We were giddy because we'd made music for so many years while no one gave a shit, and then all of a sudden they did. It was a very exciting time, but a confusing one too. As usual, the record went through many configurations and permutations. Pollard considered about 65 songs for what later became B-1000. For a while, it was going to be a double LP with the title Instructions to the Rusty Time Machine. Rusty Time Machine had basically the same track list that was eventually released as B1000 the Director's Cut in 2004, except a track called Hello Song would have taken the place of Revolution Boy. The proposed double record had a running time of over an hour and included a whopping 33 songs. A large number of the tracks that were cut would appear on the King Shit and the Golden Boys compilation in 1995, while others would surface in the ensuing years on records, EPs, or one of the Suitcase anthologies. The fact that Pollard whittled down the proposed double album to a single was a shrewd move. There aren't many absolute classic double records. Pretty much all of them suffer, rightly or wrongly, from the criticism that it could have made an all-killer, no-filler single disc. Reviewing B1000, the Director's Cut, when it came out, Pitchfork wrote, "This original sequence is so bafflingly unsatisfying that it might have kept Guided by Voices in the basement for another decade had clearer heads not prevailed." One of those heads belonged to Scat Records founder Robert Griffin. After the warm reception that Vampire and Titus had received, and upon hearing Bob's new work in progress, Griffin began pushing Pollard and making suggestions as to track selection and running order. "I just knew that was going to be a record that sold forever," said Griffin, "and that's what gave me the courage to challenge Bob about the sequence and what songs he chose to be on it, because I knew if the right songs and the right sequence were there, that it was a record for the ages." It's hard to argue with the results. For example, the second song slated for Rusty Time Machine was Death Trot and Warlock Riding a Rooster. I think it's safe to say that it's not one of Bob's best songs, and it doesn't hold a candle to Buzzards and Dreadful Crows, the song Pollard finally chose as the second track of the album. Griffin also pushed Bob on the cover. According to Pollard, "The cover I gave Robert Griffin was a lot more surreal. It was a stranger cover. He redesigned it, trimmed it down, and made it a little simpler." The final cover featured just a detail of Pollard's original collage, set against a mostly white background. The redesigned back cover was similarly striking, using pared-down elements of Bob's original materials, along with swaths of red and blue. The red, white, and blue color scheme was reinforced throughout the design, with side one being the red room and the second side being the blue room. Naming the sides like this harkened back to the Buckeye and Briar sides of the first GBV LP, Devil Between My Toes. The record was also pressed on separate editions of red vinyl, white vinyl, and blue vinyl. Griffin also designed the lyric sheet, with each song given its own image, which Bob and Toby supplied. Each song title is also in a different font. "That was a result of my prog rock inclination," said Pollard. "I always liked lyric sheets that had a separate image with each lyric. The whole package was miles ahead of their previous records." The title was a typical Pollard construction, with help from his brother Jim. Jimmy had come up with Zoo-thousand, but around the same time, Bob passed by a drive-in theater playing the family film Beethoven, only they'd used a U instead of a V on the marquee. This led Bob to come up with B-thousand. He also liked that if you said the title while holding your tongue, it sounded like Pete Townsend. All of that being said, it was a title he'd come up with a few years before, since it's the last song on the Grand Hour EP. In terms of who played on the record, even though Bob had gotten a band together for the show at CBGB's the previous summer, there was still no solid lineup. "It was important to me we capture a song in the least amount of time from when I conceived it to when we put it on tape," said Bob of his working method during the B1000 period. "That's the way to capture the purest essence of a song." This meant that whoever was around played on whatever song was being batted around that day. The LP was their second full-length release on Scat, and, as it turned out, it'd be their last to feature new content. Other than the box set that Scat released the following year, GBB wouldn't release anything else on Scat. B1000 was issued on vinyl, CD, and cassette. The band had a bit of good luck since the release coincided with Scat signing a distribution deal with Matador Records. This meant that B1000 was the most widely available GBV record up to that point. That also put them on Matador's radar, something that would have a big payoff the following year. Once the record hit the streets, the reviews were uniformly positive. Spin magazine gave B1000 its highest ranking, the one that told readers to go directly to your local record store and buy this album immediately, kill if you must. The review's first paragraph is all about lo-fi, mentioning bands such as Pavement, Sebado, and the Grifters, comparisons which, as I said in the last episode, really don't make sense. The review also mentions the band's age, saying that they're old. It should be noted that the issue in which this review appeared had Beck on the cover, and he looks like he's about 14. Spin praised the record's absolutely shattering melodies, comparing GBV with T-Rex, R.E.M., Cheap Trick, and the Beatles. Pollard, as a songwriter with his baddie lyrics, again gets compared to the fried synapses of Syd Barrett and Rocky Erickson, along with Daniel Johnston. And yeah, while there's certainly a through line from Arnold Layne and See Emily Play to Echoes Myron and Chasing Heather Crazy, I find this comparison to be insulting to Bob. Each of those musicians had serious mental illnesses, having to either spend time in mental institutions or have to ultimately abandon music because they went insane. Pollard, by contrast, just has a vivid imagination. Spin ends the review by writing, "If there's a weakness here, it's brevity. I wouldn't mind if perfect pop songs like these stretched on forever." Michael Azerrad, author of the underground rock Bible Our Band Could Be Your Life, gave B-1000 a 4-star review in Rolling Stone. He called the record remarkable and declared that it's a tour de force by a good old-fashioned American basement genius. Being called a genius by probably the most important music magazine in the world had to make Pollard feel good. Years later, B-1000 came in at 79 on Rolling Stone's list of the 100 best records of the 90s, one spot above Last Splash by the Breeders. Always competitive, that must have made Bob smile. Perhaps more importantly, Bob was not only being accepted by his peers, he was being embraced. When musician and early GBV fan Matt Sweeney was in town, they brought an advance cassette of B-1000 to Kim Deal's house. The Pixies bassist and Breeders founder had grown up in Huber Heights but now lived in Oakwood. They all got stoned and played B-1000 and everyone loved it. It was reactions like this that persuaded Pollard to make the biggest leap of his life, quitting his job and pursuing music full-time. Not that it was an easy decision. There are people who said I still shouldn't quit teaching because I'd been doing it for 14 years and had benefits and a family to think about. But I knew this was something I needed to do. I'd rather give it an effort and fail than regret that I didn't have the balls to take a chance on doing what I really wanted to do. Well, there wasn't an advance single for B-1000. After the record was released, Scat put out the I Am a Scientist EP. This included a re-recorded version of I Am a Scientist along with 3 non-LP tracks. The band even made a video for I Am a Scientist. The video features mostly black and white footage of the guys, including Pollard playing guitar and wearing a blazer. But there's also some random, weird stock footage interspersed with the band stuff. The footage at the band shell was shot at Dayton's Island Metro Park, described on the metroparks.org website as an urban oasis with a long Dayton history. The band shell was built in 1940 and played host to a number of popular entertainers, including comedians Abbott and Costello, who performed there in 1942. It's now part of GBV history, also making an appearance in the 2017 video for 5 Degrees on the Inside. The video also shows the band playing basketball, which is a nod to the jock pasts of both Bob and Jim. In the clip, they show off the skills they would later use to vanquish the Beastie Boys when they beat them on the Lollapalooza tour, the Beastie Boys having brought a basketball net on tour. You can watch the Beastie Boys talk about this as an extra commentary track on Spike Jonze's collection of music videos that came out in 2003. The video is simple and raw, which means it matches the song and the band perfectly. It was shown several times on MTV as part of its legendary alternative music show 120 Minutes, which aired late on Sunday nights. And just to show how ubiquitous GBV was becoming in indie circles around this time, both I Am a Scientist and the Breeders' version of Shocker and Gloomtown were once shown during the same episode of 120 Minutes. Perhaps more importantly, MTV News did a segment on GBV around this time, interviewing the band, showing them in concert, and documenting their rags to riches success story. The boys were fast becoming a legitimate phenomenon. And to get a bit of context for what was happening in 1994, the big indie rock records of the year were Pavement's second LP, Crooked Rain, as well as what I consider to be Superchunk's masterpiece, Foolish. But it was also the year of Weezer and Oasis's first records, Blur's Parklife, The Downward Spiral by 9 Inch Nails, Beck's breakout with Loser, and Green Day's huge record, Dookie. It was also the era of Generation X and Slackers, technically speaking, Bob and the guys didn't belong to either of these categories. They were too old for Generation X, and they had real jobs and so couldn't be considered slackers. Hell, their bass player just graduated from law school. The 90s stereotype put in place by films like Reality Bites, where good-looking 20-somethings hung out all day in coffee shops, had nothing to do with Guided by Voices. These guys were parents. They owned homes. They were, as you heard over and over again, old. So the fact that GBV not only made an impression on indie rock, but became one of the defining acts of the period is pretty damn cool. It was something that Pollard himself couldn't believe. Talking about the first time they played in New York, Bob said, "Afterwards I went off the stage and I went back in this little dressing room and all of a sudden I got mobbed by people from Pigpen and the Beastie Boys and I was freaking out a little bit. I was going, really? Are you shitting me? You actually think we're good?" And while the band's backstory continued to prove irresistible to journalists, and GBV seemed to be everywhere you turned, the main reason for why B1000 connected with people is just because it's so damn good. And while, yeah, there was sort of a lo-fi scene, and yeah, people in bands were recording and releasing stuff on 4-track, leaving in mistakes and noise and stuff like that, GBV were operating on a whole other level. No one had the influences they did. No one wrote or recorded songs like them, and no one sounded like Guided by Voices. Pavement threw up a bunch of clones in their wake, and lightweight grunge bands were a dime a dozen in the wake of Nirvana's success. But no one successfully followed in GBV's footsteps, and no one has since managed to equal or recreate B1000, not even the band who created it. "I'm not trying to create another B1000, because I don't know how to do that," Bob later said. "It's got to be an accident, I guess. B1000 was an accident." So then let's dive into the accident crash by crash. The record kicks off with Hardcore UFOs.
Sitting out on your house, watching hardcore UFOs, throwing pictures, playing sodas to them. Are you amplified to rock?
True to Bob's intention of constructing and recycling older songs, this is a reworked track from the 80s called Walls and Windows. Bob called the original some kind of pseudo-Paisley thing, with lyrics that were too flowery. It was slated to go on an abandoned record from 1984 called Pissing in the Canal. Bob kept the melody and some of the words, but otherwise came up with new lyrics. You can hear the original version on Suitcase 4, Captain Kangaroo Won the War. It's a great way to open the record, especially when the guitar cuts out about 2/3 of the way through the song. It's Pollard's way of letting you know you're not in Kansas anymore. Plus, the question, "Are you amplified to rock?" sets us up for the journey that follows. Next is Buzzards and Dreadful Crows.
16 chicks remain on watch for the wheels to come rolling in, and they do. Yes, they always do. I'd be bored and disappointed if they didn't.
Oh my god, it's just such a good song, isn't it? And again, Bob's reworking some older material here to great effect. The snippet song from Propeller, Back to Saturn X Radio Report, opens with a few lines from a different version of the same song. Bob calls Buzzards one of the Fear of Death songs I sometimes write. Similar to the Exit Flagger, Pollard says, "Death is coming to get you, waiting like cats." The song dates from about 1990 and was written along with a batch of songs that ended up on LP number 4, the same place the Fly got smashed. Live, this song is amazing, and not in a balls-to-the-wall way like Cutout Witch, which is when people go nuts. Instead, it's just this amazing communal song that gets the whole room singing along. Live or on record, this has to be seen as one of GBV's all-time, all-around best songs. The third song is Tractor Rape Chain.
Why is it every time I think about you? Something that you have said or implied makes me doubt you.
Again, how good is this song? My God. So by this point, you're really getting the effect that Robert Griffin was going for in the sequencing, with 3 amazing songs appearing right in a row. As a listener, you're just hooked and want to hear more. Bob says of the lyrics, in an abstract way, the song has something to do with the raping of the land or ecological damage. He also cites it as an example of taking a pretty melody and giving it a really strange lyric that doesn't jibe. I agree in that the verses seem to be about a relationship, but the chorus doesn't make much sense. But the song sounds so good, I don't really care. And again, when the band plays it live, it's another one of those shout at the top of your lungs audience sing-alongs that's always a blast. If you're at a GBV show and you don't end this song with your arm around someone else's shoulder, you're not doing it right. Next up is the Gold Heart Mountaintop Queen Directory.
Cold hands touching my face. Don't hide, the snake can see you. Old friends you might not remember, fading away from you. The Gold Heart Mountaintop Queen Directory.
Even though the record slows down a bit with this quiet song, it's another absolutely gorgeous song which has since become a real fan favorite. Pollard says he wrote it while he was on acid. I was by myself and I was looking into the mirror in the bathroom. My face changed into my son's face. I saw my son in my face and it moved me to tears. That's what inspired me to write the song. And whether it's Weed King or quotes like that, GBV is so associated with beer that I always find it strange to hear of Pollard abusing any substance other than alcohol. It's kind of like if David Bowie drank Miller Lite. That'd be kind of odd, right? The song was recorded onto a random cassette tape that Pollard only found right before B1000 was mastered. Also, the phrase, Hallway of Shatterproof Glass, would provide the name of the 2010 reunion tour of the so-called classic lineup. The next song is Hot Freaks.
I met a non-dairy creamer, explicitly laid out like a fruitcake, with a wet spot bigger than a Great Lake.
The instrumental track was done by Tobin Sprout, with Bob singing over it. It only took him one take, and it's probably the best example of Pollard's surreal lyrics, which he says were inspired by King Crimson's Pete Sinfield. The vocals were recorded on a day when Sprout's wife was having a yard sale, and Bob was in the basement shouting out "hot freaks" over and over, which must have been comical to the people above ground looking at picture frames and dishes. Next up is Smothered in Hugs. This is another absolutely gorgeous song that you just sort of sink into. You don't really listen to it as much as you ride the tune like a wave. The verses are hypnotic with the way that Pollard almost mumbles the words before going into a soaring chorus. Pollard says the song's about the long-standing apathy he'd received from his family, as well as watching interesting possibilities slip away. He also uses his experience of being on his school's textbook committee to draw a parallel between how the establishment declares history's winners and losers. These are the people who have, as Pollard writes, decided you should be left out, not even mentioned. It was the fate he'd always feared for GBV, although he now saw the opposite happening. The song then segues into Yours to Keep.
To see a sight unseen is worse than pick you up because you're first, and go where the whistle blows, and go where the captain knows he's just a lie.
The band was using computer technology for the first time, and it's something they used to great effect when it came to merging songs together or dropping in bits of snippets here and there. It really adds to the patchwork or puzzle feel of the record, and frankly, it's the kind of thing I missed on later records. I mentioned GBV superfan Albert Hammond Jr. from The Strokes in the last episode. He titled his first solo record, released in 2006, Yours to Keep. Last song on side 1 is Echo's Myron.
Tower to the skies, an academy of lies. And what goes up surely must come down. And we felt the mighty blowout with the walls coming down. Or something like that.
Again, what's there to say about this song except it's one of GBV's best. It's the perfect way to end side 1. The bass line is amazing, and the lyrics are a victorious declaration of GBV's success. Pollard writing, "We're finally here, and shit yeah, it's cool." That being said, he's realistic about the fate of the band, singing "What goes up must come down." Early versions of the B1000 tracklist had this as Echoes with an E, like the Pink Floyd song. This is another stone-cold classic fan favorite that I, personally, never get tired of hearing. Side 2 kicks off with Gold Star for Robot Boy.
Gold star for Robot Boy, that's okay.
Once again, it's a spectacular song and a great way to start the side. It's also one of the few songs that was written just for the record. It wasn't based on older or reworked material. Bob says, I wrote Gold Star for Robot Boy when I was in the process of making a decision about whether I should continue to teach or quit to become a recording artist. It was a way of putting that question to myself. What should I do? Should I go for the Gold Star, just like some of the kids in my class do? I became the Robot Boy. But Pollard's also castigating yet again all those people who'd never believed in him, as well as giving them a bit of an I told you so. He writes, if I waited for you to show me all the actions I should take, would I get my break? And of course he didn't wait. He chose his own actions, and it ended up working very well for him. A self-described noisy slacker rock band in southern Utah liked this song so much they named their band Gold Star for Robot Boy. On their Facebook page they write, we suck, come see us play. Next up is the first Tobin Sprout song on the record, Awful Bliss.
You chose a giant step that caught your eye, guaranteed sweetness that you thought broken and you were not fine. And bearing in mind,
It's a really lovely track and a great example of how a song can be short and yet still feel complete. Sprout has said that it's about a woman, adding, be careful what you want because you might get it. Next up is another Toby song, Mincer Ray. This is more of a full band song, which is maybe why it doesn't sound too weird coming right after another one of Toby's songs. And just to show how influential this record was, there's a GBV pavement-inspired band out of Berlin named Mincer Ray. You can find them at mincerray.com. Check them out, they're good. The voices you hear in the middle of the song are Bob and Jim, who are, according to Sprout, talking about their dad calling them up saying he wants money. Money, and basically the lack of it, was a point of contention between Pollard and his dad for years. Pollard's dad had wanted both Bob and Jim to play professional sports, Pollard later saying he had dollar signs in his eyes. So it must have been a disappointment when both his boys, who were star athletes in high school, turned their backs on sports and instead became interested in and pursued music. The next song is A Big Fan of the Pigpen.
Oh, to stick on one's feet, to beat on one's brain. The popular mechanics are at it again. A tenement filled with sideshow freaks assembled to downgrade an impeccable arrangement by the soft rock renegades. Give me time to
The music was recorded during a jam session with Bob, his brother Jim, and their friend Randy Campbell, the guy seen behind Bob on the back of Vampire on Titus. Bob says the song encapsulates that lo-fi aesthetic we were into at the time, adding that, I'm a big fan of the Pigpen because the Pigpen is not perfect, it's low down and dirty. The song also has the line, an impeccable arrangement by the soft rock renegades. Pollard released a record in 2001 named Choreographed Man of War, credited to Robert Pollard and the soft rock renegades. Next up is Queen of Cans and Jars. The riff that runs through most of the song is just great, and the whole tune just has a really warm vibe. The lyrics lean a bit towards Bob's prog side, but it's pretty much a perfect song at just under 2 minutes. It's probably also one of the best examples of how the guys managed to sound good recording in a basement on a 4-track. The next song is Her Psychology Today.
Her psychology today is to play the crying game, to elicit a response, to determine.
This is one of the weirder songs on the record, with a bunch of different sections and some spoken word stuff in the middle that you can't quite make out. Parts of it were taken from a song called The Way to a Man's Heart. that song was originally going to be on the very first version of what was to become B1000, which was called All That Glue. Next is Kicker of Elves.
Kicker of elves, kicker of elves, kicker of elves, kicker of elves on high sea.
It probably goes without saying that lyrically, this song comes from Bob's fantasy prog side. And however you feel about that now, it was something that rubbed a lot of indie rockers the wrong way when this record first came out. Eric Davidson from Columbus band New Bomb Turks referred to this kind of thing as GBV's Star-Spangled Elf shit. Again, this was the 90s. The Lord of the Rings movies wouldn't appear until the next decade, and Harry Potter was still a few years away. Hipsters were wearing flannel and sporting goatees, trying to look serious and edgy, so singing about elves and wizards was just not what was done if you wanted to be taken seriously. That being said, this is a fun song. And while I couldn't find a band brave enough to name themselves Kicker of Elves, a brewery in Athens, Ohio produces a beer called Kicker of Elves. It's been described as a clean amber beer with a beige head of foam. However, at the collaborative fiction website The Wanderer's Library, I found a very long description of what a true Kicker of Elves might actually do. I'll post a link to that on the Facebook page. Next up is Ester's Day.
Scenes from Ester's Day, running backward courses with a horse of different forces flying.
The song starts with a short clip from the song At Odds with Dr. Genesis before segueing to another really nice Tobin song. It's about, as he says, a woman stifled by life. She has dreams of leaving, driving off, away from her life, into a better life. The full version of At Odds with Dr. Genesis can be heard on the King Shit and the Golden Boys compilation. The next song is Demons Are Real. This is another weird, short song. I don't know how seriously to take the lyrics, and there's some sound in the background I just can't identify. This song shows to me that, even though Robert Griffin was advising Bob on sequencing and cover art, he was still willing to have Bob put weird songs like this one onto the record. Next up is probably the record's, and maybe even the band's, most popular and well-known song, I Am a Scientist.
I am a scientist, I seek to understand me, all of my impurities and evils yet unknown. I am a journalist, I write to you to show you I am an incurable and nothing else behaves like me.
It's a great song, and it's a serious song. It's Pollard really laying out his thoughts and ideas. Again, for as whimsical or off the cuff as the band may appear or present itself, a whole lot of Bob's songs and lyrics really say something. I also think a lot of the charm of this song is in how simple it is. It starts with a really simple guitar riff and doesn't get much more complicated than that. That simplicity turns into an invitation to listeners rather than keeping them at bay. And speaking of sequencing, it's kind of amazing that even though this was the sort of single off the record, that it comes so late on the track list. Then again, maybe that was another shrewd move by Pollard, especially since, to my ears anyway, both the previous GBV LPs started to run out of steam late into their second sides. Pollard's called this kind of a self-analyzing song. I am a scientist studying myself. I'm a journalist and reporting what I find. What he finds is that, in the end, rock and roll's the religion, the source of redemption, the way out. The song came in at number 17 in Spin Magazine's 100 Best Alternative Rock Songs of 1994. Second to last song is Peephole. Even though Paste Magazine says that this might be the record's saddest song, I hear a lot of hope and acceptance in this. For example, when Pollard writes, I'm looking inside your brain and Christ, it's a cluttered mess. He immediately follows this with, I love you, I must confess. Pollard has said humans are imperfect, and his whole body of work not only allows for imperfection, but features it. Those imperfections get pushed to the forefront to such a degree that they become an integral part of the entire experience. A mistake isn't something you sweep under the rug. It's not even a mistake. That's just what the song becomes, and without it, it's not even the song. We're the same way. We don't love our spouse or children in spite of all the little imperfections about them, but rather because of them. Final track is You're Not an Airplane.
Well, come on now and see the course that never feels the game of choice, and cold our eyes and steel couldn't buy the way it feels.
Since Toby was instrumental to the sound and feel of this record, I love that he gets the last word. Plus, the ethereal nature of this song, just the way it sounds and its overall feel, makes it a perfect way to end the record. Sprout actually has a pilot's license and has loved planes all his life. This is why aircraft imagery appears throughout his work. Think of the amazing song, To Remake the Young Flyer. Also, since GBV are thought of as a guitar-heavy rock band, which they indeed are most of the time, I love that the LP ends with just piano and voice. Plus, the final line of The Race Is Yet to Come is perfect. It's like he's saying the band is just getting started. And yet, it wouldn't always be a smooth ride. In fact, Sprout called this the last innocent GBV record. After B1000, I think we slowly lost it. Quickly adding, not lost it exactly, but it had become something else. That something would push the template of B1000 and Propeller to the absolute breaking point, and push the band to places they never thought they'd go. Okay, that's it for B1000. Next time I'll be looking at LP number 8, 1995's Alien Lanes, their 28-track debut release on Matador Records. Kim Deal called it bombastic. Find out why in the next episode. And remember, next week there'll be a special bonus episode that's a conversation with Scat Records founder Robert Griffin, so keep an eye out for that. Until then, subscribe to the show, leave a review, and God bless the Monument Club.
On the sex list, the new